Benjamin Netanyahu, born on October 21, 1949, in Tel Aviv, became one of Israel's most influential leaders and longest-serving prime ministers. Raised in a family devoted to Zionism, his early life was marked by his brother Yonatan's heroic death during the Entebbe rescue, shaping Netanyahu's strong focus on national security. After serving in the elite Israel Defense Forces and studying at MIT, Netanyahu's diplomatic and military experience propelled him into politics. As Prime Minister, he prioritized Israel's security, navigating conflicts with Hezbollah and Iran, while also implementing economic reforms. His legacy is one of resilience, marked by both praise for his defense policies and controversy over his leadership style. Benjamin Netanyahu was born on October 21, 1949, in Tel Aviv, a child of a newly established state. His parents, Ben-Zion and Zilla, had deep Zionist roots, and this influenced Netanyahu's strong sense of national identity. Growing up in a family devoted to the Zionist cause shaped his worldview from an early age. In 1963, Netanyahu's family moved to the United States, where his father worked as a professor. This move would give young Benjamin a global perspective, exposing him to American culture and ideas while retaining his Israeli identity. It was a time of personal growth and academic rigor. At the age of 18, Netanyahu returned to Israel to serve in the Israel Defense Forces (IDF), where he joined the elite Sayeret Matkal unit. His service was marked by courage and leadership, taking part in high-risk missions. His military experiences would shape his later approach to politics and security. One of the defining moments of Netanyahu's early life was the loss of his older brother, Yonatan, during the famous 1976 Entebbe rescue operation. Yonatan's death had a profound effect on Benjamin, solidifying his views on terrorism and defense. He would carry this loss with him throughout his career. After completing his military service, Netanyahu returned to the United States to pursue higher education. He attended MIT, where he earned a degree in architecture and a master's in business administration. These years would equip him with the analytical skills and strategic thinking that would serve him in his political career. In the late 1970s, Netanyahu began his diplomatic career, serving as a representative of Israel at the United Nations. His eloquent speaking and sharp political instincts quickly gained him a reputation as a skilled diplomat. He was soon recognized as a rising star within the Likud party. Netanyahu's return to Israel in the 1980s marked the beginning of his political career. He became a vocal advocate for Israel's security, leveraging his experiences and connections in the US to strengthen Israel's ties with the West. His message was clear: Israel needed to be strong to survive in a hostile region. By 1988, Netanyahu was elected to the Knesset, Israel's parliament, as a member of the Likud party. He quickly made a name for himself as a fierce advocate for security and a critic of the peace process with the Palestinians. His hawkish views resonated with a large segment of the Israeli public. In 1993, Netanyahu became the leader of the Likud party, setting the stage for his first bid for prime minister. His political rise was marked by an unwavering focus on security and economic reform, two pillars that would define his leadership style. The assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 was a turning point in Israeli politics. Netanyahu, then leader of the opposition, capitalized on the growing discontent with the Oslo Accords and positioned himself as the candidate of stability and security. His rhetoric appealed to those wary of peace talks. In 1996, at the age of 46, Netanyahu was elected as Israel's youngest prime minister. His victory was narrow, but it marked the beginning of an era. His first term in office was characterized by his tough stance on security, including his opposition to further territorial concessions in the peace process. Netanyahu's leadership style was confrontational, both domestically and internationally. He clashed with President Bill Clinton over the peace process, but his policies resonated with Israeli voters who prioritized security over diplomacy. His focus was on maintaining a strong defense. During his first term, Netanyahu pushed for economic reforms aimed at liberalizing the Israeli economy. He sought to reduce government intervention and foster a more market-oriented approach. While his reforms were controversial, they laid the foundation for Israel's later economic success. However, Netanyahu's first term was also marked by internal political struggles. He faced opposition from within his own party and from coalition partners. His hardline stance on security issues made him popular with some but alienated others, leading to a divided government. By 1999, Netanyahu's popularity had waned, and he lost the election to Ehud Barak. His first term as prime minister came to an end, but this was far from the end of his political career. Netanyahu withdrew from politics for a brief period, but his ambitions remained intact. During his time away from office, Netanyahu served as a private sector consultant and gave lectures around the world. However, the pull of politics was too strong to resist. By the early 2000s, Netanyahu returned to the political arena, ready for a second act. In 2002, Netanyahu was appointed as finance minister under Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. It was a crucial period for Netanyahu, as he implemented sweeping economic reforms that transformed Israel's economy. His policies were controversial, but effective in stabilizing the economy. Netanyahu's tenure as finance minister was marked by deep cuts to public spending and privatization of state-owned enterprises. His economic policies earned him both praise and criticism. Supporters hailed him as a reformer, while opponents accused him of exacerbating inequality. Despite the controversies, Netanyahu's economic reforms laid the groundwork for Israel's tech boom and its emergence as a global economic player. His belief in free markets and fiscal discipline became central to his political ideology. In 2005, after Ariel Sharon left the Likud party to form Kadima, Netanyahu once again took control of the Likud leadership. He positioned himself as the leader of the opposition, continuing to advocate for a hardline stance on security and a free market approach to the economy. The 2006 Lebanon War was a defining moment in Netanyahu's career. Though he wasn't prime minister at the time, his calls for strong military action against Hezbollah laid the groundwork for his future policies. After his return to power in 2009, Netanyahu's approach to Hezbollah shifted to a strategy of deterrence, using precision strikes and diplomatic maneuvers to keep the group in check. Despite the devastation of the 2006 war, Hezbollah survived and became even more dangerous, fortified with Iranian support and Nasrallah's leadership. Netanyahu's tenure saw numerous operations aimed at disrupting Hezbollah's military buildup, including airstrikes in Lebanon and Syria. Tensions remained high, but Netanyahu's ability to avoid another full-scale war demonstrated his pragmatic approach to an unsolvable conflict. Benjamin Netanyahu's tenure as Israel's prime minister was marked by numerous security challenges, but none was more significant than the ongoing conflict with Hezbollah, the powerful militant group based in Lebanon. Hezbollah, led by Hassan Nasrallah, represented a persistent threat to Israel's northern border, and the tensions between the two escalated into full-scale war during Netanyahu's leadership. The roots of the conflict stretched back decades, but it came to a head in the early 2000s. Hezbollah, supported by Iran and Syria, had fortified its positions in southern Lebanon and launched frequent rocket attacks on northern Israel. Netanyahu viewed Hezbollah as a proxy for Iranian aggression, part of a broader strategy to encircle Israel with hostile forces. In July 2006, the conflict erupted into the Second Lebanon War. The immediate trigger was a Hezbollah cross-border raid that resulted in the capture of 2 Israeli soldiers and the deaths of several others. Netanyahu, though not prime minister at the time, was a vocal supporter of a strong military response. He called for decisive action to crush Hezbollah and eliminate its threat to Israel's security. When Netanyahu returned to power in 2009, the scars of the 2006 war were still fresh. The conflict had been costly for both sides, with over 1,000 Lebanese and around 160 Israelis killed. Despite Israel's overwhelming military power, Hezbollah had survived the onslaught, and its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, emerged as a symbol of resistance in the Arab world. Netanyahu made it clear that he would not tolerate Hezbollah's resurgence. Under his leadership, the Israel Defense Forces IDF conducted numerous operations to disrupt Hezbollah's activities, including targeted airstrikes against weapons shipments and arms depots. He also strengthened Israel's northern defenses, deploying the Iron Dome missile defense system to protect against future rocket attacks. The war of words between Netanyahu and Nasrallah intensified during these years. Nasrallah frequently taunted Israel in his speeches, claiming that Hezbollah was prepared for any future conflict. Netanyahu, in turn, warned that any aggression from Hezbollah would be met with overwhelming force. The 2 leaders became emblematic of the broader Israeli-Arab conflict, representing opposing visions for the future of the region. Netanyahu's strategy towards Hezbollah was twofold: military deterrence and diplomatic pressure. He worked closely with the United States and other international partners to increase sanctions on Iran and its allies, aiming to weaken Hezbollah's financial and logistical support. At the same time, he authorized covert operations designed to disrupt Hezbollah's supply lines and intelligence networks. The shadow war between Israel and Hezbollah continued throughout the 2010s, with both sides avoiding full-scale conflict but engaging in periodic skirmishes. In 2015, tensions escalated once again when an Israeli airstrike in Syria killed several senior Hezbollah figures, including Jihad Mughniyeh, the son of the notorious Hezbollah commander Ahmad Mughniyeh. Hezbollah vowed revenge, and the threat of another war loomed large. Throughout this period, Netanyahu maintained that Israel's security was his top priority. He frequently invoked the memory of the 2006 war, reminding Israelis of the devastation Hezbollah had caused and warning of the group's growing arsenal of rockets and missiles. He insisted that any future war would be fought on Israel's terms, with the goal of delivering a decisive blow to Hezbollah's capabilities. Hassan Nasrallah, meanwhile, continued to rally support for Hezbollah, portraying the group as the vanguard of resistance against Israeli aggression. He remained a thorn in Netanyahu's side, frequently appearing on television to deliver fiery speeches that condemned Israel and vowed to liberate Palestine. The psychological aspect of the conflict was not lost on Netanyahu, who understood that Hezbollah's propaganda efforts were aimed at undermining Israeli morale. Despite the ongoing tension, Netanyahu managed to keep the conflict with Hezbollah contained. He was wary of dragging Israel into another prolonged war, knowing that a direct confrontation with Hezbollah would be costly. Instead, he favored a strategy of deterrence, using precise military strikes to send a message without provoking all-out war. In 2019, the discovery of several Hezbollah attack tunnels along the Israel-Lebanon border heightened fears of an imminent conflict. Netanyahu ordered the IDF to destroy the tunnels, which had been built to allow Hezbollah fighters to infiltrate Israeli territory in the event of a war. The operation, known as Operation Northern Shield, was hailed as a success, but it underscored the ever-present threat that Hezbollah posed to Israel's security. Netanyahu's approach to the Hezbollah threat was shaped by his broader geopolitical strategy. He viewed Hezbollah as part of Iran's arc of influence stretching across the Middle East, and he saw Israel's role as the frontline state in the battle against Iranian expansionism. This worldview informed his policy decisions, from military operations to diplomatic outreach. While Netanyahu sought to avoid another war with Hezbollah, he was not afraid to take bold actions when necessary. In 2020, reports emerged of Israeli airstrikes targeting Hezbollah positions in Syria, where the group had been supporting the Assad regime. These strikes were part of a broader Israeli campaign to prevent Iran and Hezbollah from establishing a permanent military presence on Israel's northern border. Hassan Nasrallah, for his part, continued to walk a fine line between provocation and restraint. While he regularly boasted of Hezbollah's readiness for war, he also understood the high stakes involved in a full-scale conflict with Israel. Both Netanyahu and Nasrallah knew that another war would be devastating, not just for Israel and Hezbollah, but for the entire region. By the time Netanyahu left office in 2021, the conflict with Hezbollah remained unresolved. The group was still entrenched in southern Lebanon, its arsenal of rockets larger than ever. However, Netanyahu's policies had successfully deterred Hezbollah from launching another major attack on Israel. His legacy in this regard is one of cautious strength, avoiding war while preparing for the worst. Netanyahu's handling of the Hezbollah threat will be remembered as one of the key aspects of his tenure. His focus on military preparedness, combined with his ability to maintain international support, allowed Israel to navigate one of the most dangerous periods in its recent history. The shadow war between Netanyahu and Nasrallah remains a central chapter in the ongoing conflict between Israel and its neighbors. In the end, Netanyahu's approach to Hezbollah was one of vigilance and resolve. He understood that while full-scale war could be avoided, the threat posed by Nasrallah's forces could never be fully eliminated. For Netanyahu, the conflict with Hezbollah was not just a battle between two adversaries, it was a microcosm of Israel's broader struggle for survival in a hostile region.
Ever think about how some people just seem like they were born to be leaders? Well, today we're diving deep into the life of someone who definitely fits that description. Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, his story is really something.
It's practically a crash course in Israeli history, right? I mean, born the same year Israel was established. You can't make that up.
It's a complex story for sure. We really have to get past the typical headlines and sound bites if we want to understand how this guy leads.
I'm all for that. So let's dive in. Family first. They were really strong believers in Zionism, right?
Absolutely staunch Zionists.
Okay, but what does that even mean for someone growing up in that kind of environment?
Well, imagine it's more than just a political opinion for them. It's a core value. Believing in a Jewish state, a homeland for the Jewish people, it's a fundamental part of who they are, like their identity. And in Netanyahu's case, his dad was a historian, right?
Yeah.
And he believed that the Jewish people were destined to repeat these cycles throughout history. Exile, then return to their homeland. So you grow up with those ideas all around you. It had a huge impact on young Benjamin, that's for sure.
But hold on. His family moves to the U.S. when he's a kid. Did living in America change his perspective?
It's a good question. Imagine growing up with these incredibly strong beliefs about Israel, then experiencing a whole other culture firsthand. I think that's got to shape how you see things.
Yeah, I could see that.
Some people say it made him more pragmatic, like he realized how the world saw Israel. But others say it actually just made his belief in a strong, independent Israel even stronger. It's hard to say for sure.
Okay, so eventually he goes back to Israel for military service. And we're not talking about just any unit, right? This is Sayeret Matkal, basically, their version of the Navy SEALs.
Yeah, the best of the best.
I mean, what kind of person volunteers for that?
It takes a certain personality, that's for sure. It tells you he's comfortable with risk, okay? And that he's able to perform under pressure. Sayeret Matkal, they're the ones you call for hostage rescues, counterterrorism, intelligence gathering. Dangerous stuff,
Yeah.
often behind enemy lines. No doubt about it, these experiences, they stay with you, definitely shaped his leadership.
And then there's the tragedy that I think hangs over everything for him. His brother, Yonatan, killed during the Entebbe raid. That's got to be life-altering.
Absolutely pivotal moment in Israeli history, that raid. I mean, they go all the way to Uganda to rescue hostages from terrorists. Talk about a daring mission. But for Netanyahu, it's more than history. It's personal. This wasn't some theoretical threat. This was real. It showed him firsthand the cost of conflict, the human cost.
So it makes sense that security became his top priority, like not just a policy for him, something way deeper.
Exactly. And that's something you have to understand if you want to understand Netanyahu's leadership, you know what I mean? Security is everything. Everything, his stance on peace talks, his hardline approach to terrorism, it all goes back to that.
So we've got this young guy, right, shaped by tragedy, driven by this deep sense of mission. But before we get to his life in politics, there's this interesting period where he goes back to the U.S. after the military. He could have done anything, but he goes to MIT. What do you make of that?
Yeah, pretty interesting choice. He ends up with degrees in architecture and business. Can you believe that?
Really?
Yeah. Seems like a world away from his military background, doesn't it? But honestly, I think it shows how ambitious he was, how curious.
It's like he was building a different kind of arsenal or something. Instead of weapons, it's knowledge, skills, right?
Exactly. And you can see those skills later on, right? Strategic thinking, solving problems, even that design sense, that discipline. Those were all assets later in life, believe me. It's like MIT was another kind of training ground, just not the one you'd expect.
Okay, so that's the background. But how does he go from MIT grad to, prime minister? How does he break into politics?
Diplomacy. That's how it starts. He's Israel's ambassador to the UN, and that's where he really learns to work on the world stage. Gets a reputation, too. People see him as this really sharp advocate for Israel, someone who can hold your attention, articulate complex ideas. Very compelling.
And that's where the Likud party comes in, right?
Yeah.
For those of us who don't follow every twist and turn of Israeli politics, can you give us the quick rundown on Likud?
Sure. Essentially, they're a center-right party, known for taking a hawkish stance on security, and economically, they're more on the liberal side, free markets, that kind of thing. They're Menachem Begin's party, the prime minister who signed the peace treaty with Egypt. But they're also known for being against a Palestinian state and for supporting those Israeli settlements in the West Bank. So it's complicated.
It always is, right?
Yeah.
So Netanyahu rises to the party, and in 96, boom, he makes history. Youngest prime minister ever. What was that like, those first years leading Israel?
Security and economic reform, those were his big focuses, but it was a really divisive time in their politics. Don't forget, this is just a few years after the Oslo Accord, so the peace process was a huge issue. Still is, honestly, but back then, it was really splitting people.
So he comes in with this serious security background. How does that shape his approach to the peace process?
Well, he was a lot more cautious than Rabin, that's for sure. Rabin, his predecessor, he'd really embraced Oslo, but Netanyahu, he was skeptical of giving concessions to the Palestinians, especially when it came to, security, understandably, right? A lot of the international community, they saw him as being too inflexible, but that's Netanyahu. He's going to stand his ground, especially on security.
And then there's the economic side, right? He pushes these pretty big reforms. What was the thinking there?
Free markets. That was his thing. He wanted to liberalize the Israeli economy, less government regulation, more foreign investment. That was the idea. So he starts privatizing companies owned by the state, cuts social spending, deregulates the banking sector, the whole 9 yards.
Wow. I bet that didn't go over well with everyone. Big changes like that.
Definitely ruffled some feathers. Supporters, they loved it. They saw a bold reformer who was willing to make tough calls. Opponents, they thought he was in bed with big business, said he only cared about the rich. And honestly, that division in the country, it contributed to him losing the next election in 99.
So that's it, right? Game over.
Not even close. This is Netanyahu, remember. That's what's so fascinating about the guy. He bounces back, like he takes a hit, learns from it, and then comes back stronger. He is not afraid of a fight, and he's playing the long game, and the perfect example of that. His time as finance minister under Sharon.
Oh yeah, that was big.
Yeah.
What did he do there?
More economic reform. He used that position to push his agenda even further. Even when people in his own party disagreed, he stuck to his guns. But this time, the economy was doing well, and he used that to his advantage. When he took back control of Likud in 2005, he was riding high.
Talk about a comeback. Takes a hit, learns, then climbs his way back to the top.
Exactly. He's got this tenacity, this belief in his own vision that just won't quit. And that sets the stage for his, shall we say, second act as prime minister and this epic showdown with Hezbollah.
Okay, so we've covered how Netanyahu became prime minister, but now we have to talk about Hezbollah. And this isn't just some political rivalry, right? This feels personal.
You hit the nail on the head. For Netanyahu, Hezbollah represents everything he's ever fought against. I mean, they are a heavily armed militia, right, on Israel's border, and they fundamentally oppose the very existence of Israel. And then you add in the fact that they're backed by Iran, which just complicates things even further.
And they're not tucked away somewhere, right? They're on Israel's northern border,
Yeah.
which has got to be a constant source of anxiety.
Think about it, You wake up every day knowing there's a powerful, well-equipped militia right next door. That's reality for Israelis. And Netanyahu, he's used that reality to shape his whole approach to security.
He's been really clear about the threat they pose, hasn't he?
Absolutely. He's framed Hezbollah as a threat to the entire region, not just Israel. He sees them as basically a tool for Iran, a way for them to destabilize the entire Middle East.
Yeah. And what's his strategy for dealing with this very real threat?
Two main things. First, military deterrence. He's shown he's not afraid to use force, authorizing airstrikes on Hezbollah weapons, convoys, and things like that, even covert operations to disrupt them. Sending a message, mess with us, and there will be consequences.
Covert operations. Like, what are we even talking about here?
Think targeted assassinations, sabotage missions, intelligence gathering deep in their territory. Seriously risky stuff, but potentially huge rewards. And most of it top secret. Like, remember the assassination of Ahmad Muniyeh in 2008? He was a top Hezbollah commander, killed in Damascus. Israel never officially took credit, but it's pretty widely believed they were behind it. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. These high-stakes operations tell you a lot about how far Netanyahu is willing to go to protect Israel.
So it's a mix then. Overt military action and then these shadow wars happening in the background. But it's more than just bombs and bullets, isn't it? There's a whole propaganda war going on too.
Oh, for sure. Netanyahu gets that perception is everything. And he's a master communicator. He's used that skill to present Hezbollah as this dangerous terrorist organization on the world stage. And he's relentless. Speeches, interviews, he always emphasizes their brutality. Those ties to Iran we talked about, their stockpile of rockets pointed right at Israeli cities. He's very, very good at getting that message across.
Right. But Hezbollah pushes back, don't they? They've got their own narrative to sell.
100%. They have a very sophisticated PR machine, Nasrallah, their leader. Super charismatic, and he's cultivated this image of Hezbollah as like a resistance movement, bravely defending Lebanon from Israeli aggression. And it's not all talk. They run hospitals, schools, social programs. They want to be seen as this legitimate political force, not just a militia.
So it's this constant tug-of-war then, each side trying to control the narrative. How effective has Netanyahu been at countering Hezbollah's story?
Tough question. He's definitely kept the international pressure on, but has Hezbollah been disarmed, neutralized, not even close? They're still a major force in Lebanon, still capable of striking Israel. It's a stalemate in a way.
We've focused on Netanyahu's military and diplomatic strategies, but I imagine not everyone agrees with his approach. What do his critics say?
A lot of his critics say his policies have actually made Hezbollah stronger. For example, their weapons arsenal. Bigger now than when he came to power. That's a big criticism. They also point to the 2006 Lebanon war. They say it didn't really accomplish much and actually helped Hezbollah in the end. So yeah, there's that side of the story too.
So kind of a mixed bag when it comes to Hezbollah. Still a threat, but he's also managed to avoid another major conflict.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But this whole thing with Hezbollah, it says a lot about how Netanyahu leads. It shows you his pragmatism, his willingness to take risks, how he uses every single tool he has to protect Israel. Love him or hate him, he's had a huge impact on the Middle East, and it's an impact we'll continue to debate for years.
And that feels like a good place to wrap up this deep dive. We've gone from his childhood in a staunchly Zionist home to the halls of power in Israel. It's a story of ambition, of resilience, of a man who's completely committed to his vision of Israel no matter what.
And it highlights how incredibly complex leadership is in a place like the Middle East. Netanyahu's been called a strong, decisive leader by some. Others, they criticize his hardline approach, his rhetoric. But one thing's for sure, his story's far from over. He's still a major player on the world stage. And to understand what happens next, you have to understand what shaped him, the tragedies he's experienced, his deeply held convictions. It's all part of understanding this
The
ongoing
conflict
story
with
of the Middle East.
Hezbollah was far from resolved, but he had managed to keep the group's threat contained. Through a combination of military deterrence, international diplomacy, and tactical precision, Netanyahu maintained a fragile balance between war and peace. Hezbollah, under Nasrallah's leadership, remained Israel's most formidable non-state enemy. Yet Netanyahu's firm stance on security and defense ensured that the Lebanese border stayed relatively quiet during his years in office. The conflict with Hezbollah, like much of Netanyahu's career, is a story of survival, strength, and the understanding that in the volatile Middle East, peace is always temporary.